If you desire to sell your company one day, then inevitably a team of financial analysts and accountants are going to pore their way through your books. I decided that it'd be best to have a chat directly with a very experienced CPA chartered accountant that's been deep in the M&A landscape, and in fact so much so that Holli Moeini has even written a book. You've recently written a book called Finding the Missing Millions in Mergers and Acquisitions in M&A. What a fascinating and a thought-provoking title. Most business owners I know are all over the profit and loss, but there's something else that I just reckon many of us don't pay enough attention to.
But when you think about the balance sheet, it's like it houses everything that you are as a business, and it keeps score.
She makes the call for bringing not just an overview, but deep experience to the table when it comes to this critical moment.
You don't really know the pressure the founders have, and you may understand textbook stuff, but you need to be in the battlefield to really make a difference. Your accountant needs to understand the battlefield and go alongside you, and you should never go it alone.
Going deep into the numbers shows Holli that in many instances, there's things going on behind the scenes that are actually quite terrifying.
I still had the HR manager stealing stuff and getting it approved with paper. I still had all kinds of things happening.
She gives many pieces of insight into how to both lose and make a fortune through the M&A process.
So the first way to lose millions of dollars is to...
And there is an unfortunate truth when fraud is involved in a company.
The first thing I want to say to the owners that don't think it's them is like, you should rethink that. Because in every single occurrence of fraud I found, it's been with your...
Holli Moeini, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here with you and your audience.
And all the way on the other side of the world. And so you've recently written a book called Finding the Missing Millions in Mergers and Acquisitions in M&A. What a fascinating and a thought-provoking title.
Yeah, I love that. And I think that even though it's a book meant for people that are thinking about exiting, both buyers and sellers, every business owner should take a look at that book and be thinking about their exit. So I think I looked at the stats for New Zealand, and you guys kind of have some of the same poor stats that we have in the US, where 70% of sellers are not ready to exit. And then you look at 20 to 30% actually sell. And then if you flip that on its head, that means 70 to 80% don't sell, right? So there's just stats behind why a seller can't exit. And then you have stats around how many new businesses actually survive. And your stats in New Zealand are just as bad as ours. It's, in 5 years, you might do a little bit better, but like in 5 years, you're gone and it's hard to scale. So why are all these founders, owners having problems? Like 97% of your business are small businesses in New Zealand, right? So why are they having problems? I think I know. And then on the other side of the equation, we'll see if I know by the end of the podcast, but on the other side of the equation, we have buyers. We have I think you called it with one of your podcasts, the gray exodus, or I don't know what you called it, Josh, with Neil.
The tsunami. So the
tsunami. Okay, I love that. So go check out Neil Miller, I think is his name. It was a great podcast on M&A. And anyway, you said the tsunami. I thought, well, that is really it. So with the tsunami of the gray hairs leaving, and then trillions of dollars of money out there in private equity and investors, which Neil Miller is the expert on that, not me. But with all of that, you have new buyers coming into the market and they don't know what they're doing. And they're trying to buy and do this buy and build strategy. And everybody's losing millions. Everybody is struggling. And I was looking at that saying, well, how can I help? Because clearly there's a problem. I think I know the answer. And so the book is part of that answer, but we can go through that today.
Yeah, great. But that's a good layout. I've got this theory, and so circling around it, Holly, I've got
Yeah.
this theory that most founders treat their balance sheet as they would the Google terms and conditions. They kind of just scroll to the bottom and click accept. How wrong am I?
Okay, that is so funny. I wanna quote that, in my social media. That was
It's all yours.
awesome. Okay, thank you so much, and I will give you credit in your podcast, and so that is really true. So and people out there probably are thinking, "Who cares about the balance sheet?"
Mm.
So I was doing a presentation for I think it was about 600 founders. There was one accountant in the room. I knew who that accountant was, and I asked everybody, raise your hand if you review your P&L monthly. And of course, everybody's hand goes up. But
Of
raise your
course.
hand if you look at your balance sheet. The one lone accountant raised their hand. So, Josh, you win. It is the Google terms and conditions. You
Yeah,
just
well,
know that it's there. But when you think about the balance sheet, it's like it houses everything that you are as a
mm,
business and it keeps score. Where the balance sheet tells you your performance, the or that P&L gives you your performance, the balance sheet keeps score and it accumulates. And so what happens is that I think our founders struggle because we don't know how to look at the relationship of the financial statements and we don't know how to read them. And I never want to turn a CEO into an accountant, but there's some basic things that you need to know. And one of them is reviewing the balance sheet. And I always say there's a love story going on between the profit and loss. I know you're looking at me like, sure. So the profit and loss and the balance sheet, I want it to be memorable for everybody thinking about this love story with a big heart around them. They never leave each other and they are always reviewed together. And they always, I would say, they go to the ball whenever the ball's date is, that's the date they should both be dated. So you got a P&L at the end of the year, you got a balance sheet at the end of the year. And I don't want to go too far down this path, but most of the M&A deals fail in diligence.
mm,
And they fail in diligence because EBITDA ends up getting eroded. And so I'm trying to convince people to look at the balance sheet. So what happens is the balance sheet gets adjusted, and most of those adjustments are negative to EBITDA.
mm,
So
mm,
as a business owner, I'd also like to encourage you because like, I don't know what the stats are in New Zealand, but I feel like you mirror us. So like we're in the same stat. I mean, if you feel that that's fair, but there's over 50% chance you're going to have fraud. It's the easiest to tuck at places that you don't look. So I tell every business owner, know your financial story. And so I think that if you review your financial statements, which includes this love story, includes the balance sheet, the Google terms and conditions, and you look month over month. So just quickly, you see what has changed, what hasn't changed. And if your accountant can't explain that, that's a problem. But
mm.
you don't want most of the adjustments on the balance sheet to fix them goes against your EBITDA. You don't want surprises. You really, and I always say, if the balance sheet is wrong, your P&L is wrong. So think about looking at your P&L every single month and you don't know that that's the right information. And I'll just tell you, Josh, when accountants, I know accountants, I'm a CPA. So, so what accountants do when they don't know where to put something, it goes on the balance sheet. And if you think about it, it's never revenue. Money's coming in, they know where to put that. That goes as revenue, right? So your EBITDA has that revenue. But when expenses go out, where do you put that? And
Mm.
sometimes they park it on the balance sheet when it really needs to be an expense on the P&L. So I'm
Let's,
desperately trying to
yeah, let's
to
zoom in a
make
little
the
bit
balance
here.
sheet exciting. You know, how do you
Yeah,
make
yeah.
the Google terms and conditions exciting?
Yeah, I get it. So when we had our pre-chat, the conversation and the flow suggested to me that your numbers tell a story, and then what I kind of inferred from that is it a fairy tale or is it a murder mystery? And then that really nicely aligns with the body of work that you've created because you talk about the 5 crime scenes in mergers and acquisitions. So, what's one or two crime scenes that catches founders completely off guard?
Okay, the first one we just kind of talked about was your financial story. So When you sell your business, there's usually a range of multiple. And so when you sell, you want to get the high part of that range. And that range is usually a multiple of your EBITDA or your earnings. And so how do you get to the higher part of the range? There's a lot of things that go into that consideration. And one of the things is when you show up with clean, perfect financials and they don't erode in diligence, your risk starts going down to that buyer. The buyer's like, okay, we're not worried about what's going to be around the corner at close. So think of it this way: when you're preparing, you should make sure everything is tight and really the numbers, the financial story mirrors what you're speaking about. Because oftentimes they don't go, well, we've grown so much and it's only 4% growth. Okay, it's things like that that erodes confidence. And so that is a big crime scene. And we could talk more about that. But I want to hit a little bit of, let me just hit a couple others that maybe people don't think about.
Yeah.
Working capital is a huge crime
Mm.
scene. And people are going to be like, okay, well, I don't even know what working capital is, but that's a big deal. So as a seller, so it happens on both sides. As a seller, when you're selling small businesses, the fog rolls in with working capital. Some
Yes.
brokers will say, you got to keep everything. You made that AR, so it's accounts receivable, inventory, less payables. Okay, so it's like your operating cash that's going to come in. So as a seller, they will sit there and say, I made that AR, it's mine. And as a buyer, the buyer's thinking, okay, I'm paying a market multiple. I should get some portion of working capital so I don't have to get another loan to make payroll the day after closing, right? So this is such an easy concept, but it gets so much fog rolls in. Nobody knows what to do. So the first way to lose millions of dollars is to...
Hi, it's Josh. Thanks for listening to the show. When founders talk about the dream exit, they're really talking about freedom. Freedom to choose how to use their time and to decide what comes next. As a client of JB Ware in New Zealand, I know this is what sets them apart. They help entrepreneurs and leaders turn success into significance. A great exit isn't just about the commas in your bank account. It's about what those commas allow you to create. Two Commas is proudly partnered with JB Ware, helping founders by putting their wealth to work for generations.
So the first way to lose millions of dollars is to, as a seller, is to not consider that you're going to have private equity will always demand working capital. A strategic buyer will always demand working capital. So you better have that in your price. You better be thinking about having to deliver that in your price or you're already losing. And on the...
I'll just jump in there, Holly, if I
Yes.
may. So my recollection, and you're going to probably, I've probably missed something out here, but working capital is cash in bank plus accounts receivable, less accounts payable. Is that correct?
Yes. And usually most deals are cash-free, debt-free, meaning you take your cash, you get the money, and you pay off your debt. So I don't take your long-term debt, I take your payables, I may take your receivables. That's all. Everything's negotiable, but usually some level of something like that is offered so that when you go get a loan, you don't have to get more money for the loan. And so again, we've got a lot of sophisticated buyers coming in. If you're a seller, you better think about that before you're putting your price, or you're going to get a working capital haircut and you're going to be mad about it. And usually you don't find about that later. So everybody gets angry towards the end. You've spent money, emotions. This is an emotional thing that's going on both sides of the tracks, right? There's a lot happening.
And if you're
Right?
a well-run business, you're probably
Yeah.
going to have 3, maybe 6 months of cash flow sitting in cash available
Yes.
for that business. This is that whole COVID era when those, I'll quote Warren Buffett here, it's really obvious who has been swimming naked when the tide goes out. And in COVID, the tide went right out immediately because a lot of
That's
businesses
right.
were unable to trade, and they went to the government within kind of a week saying, we can't pay our bills anymore because we have no cash.
Right.
And
Right.
like that, to me, I'm curious on your thoughts about this, which is why I'm sharing the story. That to me is appalling financial discipline if you don't have to me, it's 3 months. But that's your working capital as the cash in bank. So could you give me a stance on that, by the way? Am I
Yeah, yeah,
overly
yeah.
generous? Am I too conservative?
No,
What's your thought?
I think you're right on the money for that. So let's just talk about that. So in general, to be healthy, it depends. Like 3 months is a good like rule of thumb,
Mm.
right? And in M&A, they say, oh, 3 months historical working capital. That's the usual thing. But it depends on your industry and what your cash cycle is, whether that's really true. So in the book, I actually give you two ways of looking at working capital too, because the idea behind it, an M&A transaction, the idea behind that is that nobody gets a cash haircut. There's not a big windfall for the buyer. It should just be equal. It should just be it's with the price, whatever that is. But yet accountants, nobody can quite get their arms around exactly what that number is. So it's a funny thing. So I've got it in my book. But just as far as a business owner goes, I think, Josh, you're right on the money that it's somewhere between 3 and 6 months, really. And
But then
and
in reality,
that's hard to do.
right, if you're a $10 million business per annum, then that means you've probably got $2.5 million sitting in the bank, and the
Yeah.
acquirer is probably thinking that they're going to get that money, and you've naturally assumed that you're going to get that money. So the trick is to get right out in front of it and
Yeah.
make sure that you're crystal clear about how that cash gets handled.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And typically in most private equity, they will give you your cash. They won't even try for the cash. It'll be your AR, inventory, whatever that is. So, but to your point, Josh, you got to spell it out. So that's part of the crime scene. Things aren't exactly spelled out. So buyers rush to the LOI and they get very excited. Private equity doesn't rush to an LOI. They will ask you questions until you say, come on, give me the offer, right?
Yeah.
Right? Because what they're trying to do is manage expectations, manage trust. So we all know that a letter of intent, an LOI is what I keep calling it, that it's non-binding, but yet people start spending that money for the man cave or for the ski trip or for the and then when you start changing things later, they get very mad. So they rush and just say, okay, 3 months of working capital. And sellers, I've seen a seller sign that. They didn't understand what it is. And then we've gone through diligence. So the poor buyer spent 10 grand on diligence, whatever it was. And we had already had the LOI. We were going to the asset purchase agreement. And the guy goes, no way are you getting my working capital. Like I didn't give when I bought this business, they didn't give me working capital.
Right.
So what I always say is working capital is a dance. Like somebody has to take the first step and figure out where everybody is. Then there's some education. Then there's some locking in the language, to your point. So and people that just say 3 months of working capital, that's usually wrong. I mean, that's a general. You have to go back and I have the calculation in the book. You have to go and look and really get your arms around what that is. Because again, if you're like that company you said, and you have all this cash sitting out there in investments or earning money and or a big AR, whatever it is, you have more working capital than you need. You do not want to give your buyer more working capital than they need. So
Totally get it.
again, it's a crime scene. You can see of epic proportions. Like it's happening from the very beginning, like before the LOI, the crime scene starts. Get the tape ready.
Got it. Hey, so
Yeah.
I'm a founder. And so I come to you and I say, Holli, I'd really appreciate your help. And you very generously have a 15-minute slot available for a conversation with people, with founders on your website and LinkedIn. So I come to you and I say to you, look, I'm looking to sell my business. And maybe it's in 12 months' time, maybe it's 24 months' time, but I'd just like to move this asset on. So what's the first thing that you, Holli, would look at, and what would you expect to find?
Okay, so the first thing I would tell you, whether I'm there or not, is you have to look at your financial statements.
Hmm.
And that means not your accountant. Your accountant is not designed to do that. They are designed to help, and your CPA is designed to reduce your taxes. They're not designed to do that. And I can say, as a CPA working in a CPA firm for about 10 years, I didn't know how to buy or sell businesses. So I didn't know how to do that. And I was an excellent auditor, CPA. So if I'm going in, I've got 15 minutes for you. I say, get somebody in there that can help you do gap basis financial statements. They are going to look back 3 years. They're going to look month over month. So if you've got a swinging gross profit margin, you've got anomalies, I start discounting you right away as a buyer. And so I would say, look at your story. Let's take and maximize that value, because Josh, what I see, particularly with small business, like they're growing, so they want to sell, but they give the buyer cash basis financial statements. Well, those are the lowest enterprise value financial statements you're ever going to give. Like, you already lost millions. People have lost millions that they don't even know they lost. Okay, that's what's happening. And so on a growing business, cash-based financial statements will give you the lowest EBITDA. You need to change it to accrual basis. And international financial standards are the same thing. So IFRS is not exactly GAAP, but it's the same thing. Like, you got to get your financial statements in order for 3 years, and then you look at your expenses and you add back everything you can. There are a lot of investment bankers and people out there saying, get your personal stuff out of there. And I'm like, okay, well, that's just not reasonable. Most of my owners and founders, they run their kids, I don't know, cookies through there and the country club dues and whatever else is going on, right? And I've never had a private equity or a buyer actually reject any of my ad backs. And so I know that, I mean, people know that happens as long as they're reasonable and we document them. They are consistent. Again, it's about the financial story. The better you tell the story, the better prepared you are. You will sail through diligence and you will command a higher multiple. So if I had 15 minutes, what I think all the books are missing and what investment bankers have in staff is like accounting people to do that. We're missing that with the brokers, and brokers are great humans, but like we're missing that kind of advice. And again, when we look at who you have to help you as a founder, as a business owner, you don't usually have somebody that looks at your books with an M&A lens from a financial CPA perspective.
I tell a story about my first business. We'd just come through the GFC and we'd done some things which in hindsight turned out to be very smart. And so we came out in 2010, the start of 2010, we had doubled the year before, and then we tripled that following year. And so we just had a phenomenal explosive growth through these smart interventions that we'd made. And so people started to knock on the door asking if I would like to sell the business. So the first thing that I did was I spoke to the folk that I knew in M&A, and they said, go and get a valuation and just go and work with one of the big four. And so I won't mention the name of that particular firm that came through the door, but it was my experience of the classic partner bait and switch. Incredible partner, smelled amazing, looked amazing, had all the right words to say. And then as soon as they'd signed the deal, which was a $20,000 valuation on the firm, and then a promise of a full report on, what we could do to market it and positioning in the market and all that sort of thing. They left the room and two graduates came in. I withheld my judgment to wait and see what the output was going to look like. And then 2 weeks later, I received a 40-page document. I was like, well, this is amazing. It took me till about the second paragraph to find the first typo. And the typo wasn't a word that was misspelt. It was another company that had been left in that boilerplate document, not my own company, but a different company. It was appalling.
That's the worst thing. That partner, poor partner, I feel bad for him.
5 businesses that were mentioned in there that weren't my company. Right. So it was so shoddily done, so terribly done. So you can imagine I pulled that partner over the coals, and then they went away and they refactored the whole thing and they put a proper report in front of me. Don't know what happened to those graduates, but hopefully they were flogged. But then I said to them, so you've told me what the valuation range was, and what a surprise. It was 3.5 to 4.5 times EBIT, which, as you know, that's a good growing professional services firm, which is what we were. And so I said to them, how do I maximize the valuation of this asset? And so the answer that came back to me was, what you need to do is to leverage your customer relationships to drive additional margin and create cross-selling opportunities and introduce new products into the market, and then reduce your... And I'm like, okay, you're telling me to increase profit and reduce my expenses. Like literally the homeless guy outside my office can tell me how to do that. This is not rocket science whatsoever. And so what had dawned on me very, very clearly is that the work that you do is misunderstood by most people because you've got an accountant who actually has a pretty complex job, right? They have to
Yeah,
go
yep.
through and have this, mindset of, checks and balances and allocating things into the right place and reporting and insights. And, they fall a bit short when it comes to, I think, if we set the expectations as founders and owners that our accountants should know how to increase the value of our asset, we've misunderstood the role that they are playing for us. Is that a fair statement for me to make?
Oh, that's really fair, and your experience is something that I've seen as well. I've what when sellers come to me and they say, "I got a valuation," I'm like, "Ugh, what are we gonna get?" Okay, like, because it could be soups to nuts. And then the other thing founders do, and I actually like this, Josh, if you do want to go out to market, I say go get a quality of earnings, a Q of E, report, which is a
What's
consulting
that?
report.
Yeah.
Yeah. So like it's a consulting report. So it'll give you your EBITDA and then you go to the market. You know what your valuation is by most businesses are sold as a multiple of EBITDA. So if you
Yeah.
get the EBITDA right, you got your value right. I mean, they'll tell you right there. So I'm not a certified valuation expert, but it's pretty easy because that's the market tells us what to do. But what I found was so I was taking on a client that had a Q of E and I was doing like a financial readiness assessment just to see like where you at, what you could you do to improve. And I'm going to tell you more than what you got before. Like I will tell you really precise things. And I looked at their report and they hadn't even normalized their like professional fees. So guys, you guys have conferences or professional fees or you pay Holly, that all should be added back. So they hadn't even done all the added back. I found another I wasn't even looking $800,000 of add backs. And
Wow.
so not even looking. And this was a
And
report
that's
they spent
straight on the
15
bottom
grand
line.
for.
So,
Yeah.
and then it gets multiplied by
Yeah.
your multiple. So that 800
Yeah.
grand, let's call it the average, the global average
No,
EBIT multiple of exit is 3.45. Let's call it three for argument's sake. That's $2.5 million that's just sitting there.
it's a it's a lot of money and they didn't even know. So I'm saying people in this situation don't even know and what's happening. And so I did find that my background is a little bit of a unicorn. And I work with Adam Coffey, who's actually works with a bunch of people in Australia and New Zealand, but he has sold businesses 2.5 billion in private equity. So he's been a CEO, he's been there, done that. And he was like, you're kind of a unicorn because you bring this CPA accounting background, but you've also like I did a bunch of buy and builds myself. And so I was a buyer. I was also a seller. I was more on the buy side. And so I had a different lens that I did not know when I was a CPA. I was a great CPA. I'm still a CPA, but like I was good at what I did. When you called me up, I got your audit report done, but I would not have gotten you to maximize the value of your company, nor could I really until you grow and scale companies, which I did as an executive you don't really know the pressure the founders have and you may understand textbook stuff but you need to be in the battlefield to really make a difference. Your accountant needs to understand the battlefield and go alongside you and you should never go it alone. And so once you've done that a few times, which I have, it's you have a whole different appreciation for what founders are going through and what they need to look at and how do you help them see what you are seeing. And you only know that by knowing the interworkings of the business. You got some accountant that sits not. I'm not talking about compliance people, but if you have a controller, accounting manager, any CFO, they better know your business front and back, or they can't really help you. So if they're sitting behind their computer, might not be the best for you.
Mm. You brought this up earlier on. So you mentioned that half, maybe even more than that, of small businesses experience internal fraud. So
Mhm.
there's going to be founders that'll be watching this, listening to this, and they'll be like, there's no chance that's me. But then there'll be some others that like, I wonder if maybe that is me. So what should they, at going back to the office, what should they be looking at to see if some of those signals, some of those signs might be in play?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing I want to say to the owners that don't think it's them is like, you should rethink that
Mm,
because in every single occurrence of fraud I found, it's been with your trusted person.
mm,
So let me backtrack that for a second. So I did while I was at a CPA firm. I raised my hand to work on fraud. I thought it was going to be kind of fun and sexy. It was not. It was detailed and hard.
Right.
Yeah, and kind of boring. Okay, but like finding, like I was like, oh, it's like a Scooby Doo mystery. Like it's a great mystery. I'm going to find it. Like,
It's the old
I
man
don't
from the
know.
fairground.
Exactly. You know, so I thought it was gonna be like, it wasn't. And then of course I'll give you a foundation because I want my small business owners to know that they're not alone and there's no pointing fingers. So you think you're a great CEO, it has nothing to do with fraud. So I was the CFO of companies that we went from about 30 to 200 million. I had great internal controls. I had all that set up right. And I still had fraud, guys. I still had the HR manager stealing stuff and getting it approved with paper. I still had all kinds of things happening. And it was like the HR manager was the president's daughter. The president's daughter was stealing. And then the little old lady that worked at, was a cash cow, a retail establishment. Little old lady was the accountant forever and family friend. Like she would drive up in a new Mercedes every year and nobody asked why. And I'm like, okay, well, she was stealing like hundreds of thousands of dollars. And so what I found, Josh, is the telling the financial story. So the first thing I do is I look at the financial story. What happens is things don't make sense to what you tell me as the CEO. And when things don't start making sense, and I go, well, okay, well, what happened here? What happened here? We find the fraud. And so I can tell this to your business owners that if you think there is fraud, I'm 100% convinced you have it.
Right.
I'm 100% convinced. And everybody goes through grief because it's the person they thought was their best friend or whoever it was. It's always a trusted person. And so that's 100% happening. And in every other case, I think if you've been in business for a while, you're going to have it. And if you're in the medical field, listen, all my doctors raise their hands when I ask about fraud. So so what do you do about this, Josh?
Yeah.
There are a couple of things you can do on top of the first thing would be to know your numbers. Look at that balance sheet. I'm going to hide stuff on the balance sheet if I'm stealing, or I'm going to have swings that you're not going to understand. So look at the balance sheet, um, and not in a deep dive accounting wise, just to look to see what doesn't make sense, right? So do that. Then the other thing that I noticed in all my cases is somebody knew something. It's usually AP. Somebody questioned something. I had a big fraud in our company, and it was accounts payable mad that this guy bought himself a pizza and took it home and ate it himself. It was a pizza. And then we find out he has $100,000 or more that he stole. And it was
Of
Pizzagate,
pizzas.
apparently. Okay. There's so much pizza going on. It's pizza, okay, that he ended up getting somebody mad, and somebody said something to the controller, and I was the CFO at the time. And then they started complaining about him. And I was like, wait, that doesn't sound right. Not about the pizza, but about the other things they were complaining about. I said, give me his expense reports. Let me take a look. And he was falsifying his expense reports. And so, tens of thousands. We had trips, we had everything. And our board was crushed because he was a trustee. His title was trustee. I said, that trustee isn't so trustable. And so we prosecuted. But the reason why we don't really know. We think the stats are about 50%, maybe 57%. We don't really know is because most people don't report it because it's hard to prove and it costs money to prove. You don't pull in your accountant. I just had a client that came from M&A. I looked, I said, something isn't right here. And they had all this intercompany. That's another red flag, guys. If you have a bunch of different companies, you can be stolen from and never know it, okay? Because they hide it through all the intercompany. So I was looking at it, trying to get him ready. I thought, I don't even know what his EBITDA is. And I said, this is a terrible account. I talked to the accountant, and the accountant was very like, his demeanor started changing once I started questions. He was very like, I have the clearest financial reports. And I thought, oh, they're not so clear because I can't read them. And so what happened was by the end of the conversation, he actually started to sweat. And I was like, wait, okay, his whole demeanor changed. And I'm all into the body language thing. And I'm like, okay. And I went and talked to the CEO. I said, I'll tell you if I think. I said, something's not right here. And then I went to the CPA. I said, I don't know how they're even doing tax returns. And the CPA, once we started talking and they got comfortable with me, said, well, every year he gets mad, we ask questions and they didn't do anything. So,
Mm,
guys, you think you're protected, you are not.
mm,
Just be vigilant. I hate it when people are stealing from folks and bothers
yeah,
me. But like if you are getting ready, it doesn't mean you can't sell. We fix that up. We do what we need to do and then move on.
yeah, got it. I'll just reiterate that back just to make sure that it's clear. So, there'll be likely a trail, and there'll be tells that are going to crop up through maybe the P&L, quite conceivably through the balance sheets.
Yep.
Things that are erroneous and don't make sense that'll be there. The other thing that, my words, not yours, is that where there's smoke, there's probably fire. So if you suspect someone of doing something, then it's well worthwhile to pause and to do a deep dive into that possibility and kind of, look them in the eyes, and then maybe get a forensic accountant in to kind of do that investigation for you. And unfortunately, the person, if it is happening, is quite conceivably going to be someone that's probably quite close to you, that has a role of trust. And that mirrors an experience that I had. I've had fraud, erroneous, false invoices being written, and it was from a senior person in my company who I trusted. Luckily,
Yep.
it wasn't millions. It was low hundreds of thousands of dollars, but I had no way of recollecting that money. In our country, in New Zealand, you get above a certain level, and I can't recall what it is, but it goes to the Serious Fraud Office, and that's the white
Yeah.
collar crime. And between about 100,000 and $1 million, they don't care about it. They couldn't care less about it whatsoever.
Yeah.
And so then civil in New Zealand is not something that people tend to take on terribly often because it's very expensive. No doubt it is in the States as well. And the ability for you to collect, even if you do win in a civil case, is actually not that likely. So it ends up being in this kind of grey area. So
Yeah.
in essence, what you're saying is, check and just be sure that you're across that stuff on a regular basis. So that makes
For
that makes
sure.
a lot of sense to me.
And
So
one more thing on that, Josh, just create a culture of telling and raising the flag. That's how, like that's one of the things that I see every somebody knew something. So create a culture of questioning and raising the flag and
yes.
then look at your controls. If somebody has the controls of everything,
Mm.
somebody should be looking over that person. So that's the other two final things I'll say on that.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah. Mhm.
So we both know there's a really big gap between like a bookkeeper, who does the numbers and accruals, reversals, adjustments, that sort of stuff, and a strategic CFO who can step back and think about things and see things properly. Most businesses in New Zealand, there's less than 1% of businesses, actually in the States as well, that are more than $10 million of turnover.
Mhm.
The numbers are actually pretty consistent across the Western world. Great
Mhm.
British pounds, AUD, in New Zealand, Singapore,
Yeah.
only 1% get to more than $10 million. So
Yeah.
most people are stuck in that kind of, $2 to $10 million range. And so they are in kind of no man's land from an advisory perspective. So
Mhm.
if I'm a founder, I'm sitting here, I'm listening to Holly, I'm nodding my head saying this sounds really interesting, but how do I know if my accountant or the person that I am tasked with doing that role for me is helping me build value, or they are just keeping score? What are the things that I should ask or look for?
Um, this is a great question,
Mm,
and I'm writing it down because I wanted to make sure I address both of them, both of the issues. So, if you're trying to scale, I think the reason why we struggle getting just to a million. So, I think of the businesses, only 7% that survive, only 7% get to a million. Then only 40% of them are profitable. It's just really dismal. And there's two things I'm going to say about that. One is you're probably the problem because if you can't scale, I know. I mean,
I
this
say
is.
the same
I'm
thing. It's
sorry. Okay,
controversial as
like
hell, but it's true.
I
Yeah.
apologize, but I'm not meant to be
So,
like popular, but like I want to tell you the truth. This is part of my charm or my not charm. But like you're probably the problem. You're the bottleneck to
mm,
scaling. You have to get in folks that can help you. So then you went directly to the accountant, and you said, are they here helping me build value or just keeping score? And so if you're in that 1 to 10 million, they're probably just keeping score. They're not
right.
helping you build value.
Mm,
They're just not we're not designed that way. And I have a kind of a scale that I look at and to 10 million, you better have a really good controller that can kind of not just keep score but give you insights because that's the other side of the coin. So there's two problems: me and you. You being the founder, getting out of your way so you can scale, and me being your accountant, really knowing what to do for you and being there for you. So I think most of the businesses don't have that insight, and they have a compliance-based person who's getting their information to their tax person, and we're minimizing taxes. That's the cycle. And so you don't get great information to be able to run the business. I think that's the other side of the coin. So I do think, I don't know how much you guys use this in New Zealand, but having a fractional, CFO-ish person to come in and listen, if they are the spectrum of people as well, right? Okay, so if they aren't providing enough value and covering their costs and then some, you're getting an ROI, a return on them, then they're the wrong person for you. But you should be able to get a return on them. And then you have access to resources that maybe you can't pay for full time, but you could get enough information for your accountant to move you forward. So oftentimes, I've worked with just the accountant, worked with through the CEO, worked with the accountant because the accountant's on the cusp of being able to do some of the work, and then I help bridge that gap and help them. And then that's good for them too. They get to stay on at the company and they're creating more value. So I see that too. So those are the two things I think.
Yeah, great. So, you and I know this term due diligence pretty intimately, but for the founder that's sitting there that's never been through a process of someone examining and digging back through all of their records and history, they don't really know what's involved. But there's often, no doubt, a moment that for many folk they get to that point and they go, "Shit, I should have done something differently." And how far back does that thing go? But is there like a commonality of mistakes that you see founders making when it comes to that stage of due diligence?
Yeah, so there's so many mistakes. So you're saying the biggest mistake is that you don't prepare for it because things will come out. And as a buyer, you look at things coming out and you're like, okay, well, when do I start retrading? And the general rule, if it's 10%, it's just like the hair of the deal. So it doesn't really matter. Well, so what happens in diligence is if you've never gone through an audit, it's really extensive. It's an awful feeling, and it's not anything nobody wants to go through as a seller. So the better prepared you are, the better your financial story holds up. So the one thing that ends up to being consistently a problem is revenue recognition, not having that, particularly in some industries that have project-based revenue. That's a disaster. Okay, contractors, things of that nature, a disaster. That falls apart 100%, because accountants, that's the hardest thing for them. It's the more complex area of accounting. Just, and your bookkeeper usually doesn't get it. So revenue falls apart. And the other thing that falls apart is you don't look at your balance sheet. So you have a bunch of expenses that I need to be reclassified. So those two things happen in diligence. The other thing that just beyond the numbers, the thing that starts becoming very apparent is, again, we talk about the scale of where do you want to be at multiples. Let's say you hurdle of financial obstacles, and so that's good, and your multiple in that range is going up. It also, in diligence, they will look at your people, like your leadership bench. Is it just you running around doing everything? Because if it is, your multiple goes down. And so they start evaluating, and oftentimes they want to interview the staff. That doesn't always happen. Sellers do not want to do that, but that inquiry starts happening, and so they look at every piece of your business, everything you can possibly ever imagine. If you have SOPs and standard operating procedures and things documented, this is really important. They will look at that. Legal, HR, financial, they're going to hit every single aspect and start putting risk on you, and then deciding whether they want to retrade you or not. And if your EBITDA falls apart, they're usually walking away.
Yeah, yeah, got it. So, Holly, a part of your narrative is that you say that you don't want your founder or owner to become an accountant. You just want them to see things a little bit differently than what they have done in the past. So just kind of circling around that a little bit, what does see differently look like in practice? And perhaps you can bring that to life for me in an example. So, someone that you've met or that you've worked with over time, where they were and then the thing that you showed them and then what changed for them as a consequence.
Yeah, no, I love that. So, when I say I don't want you to be an accountant, I really don't think you should spend more than a half hour looking at financial statements. In fact, I say 15 minutes.
Good enough.
And
Is that good
so
enough kind of thing?
yeah, yeah,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah,
Cool.
and so let me go to the output, and then we will go back to how we got there. So I had one client who had a CFO, and I started working with them, and when they hired me, they had this huge problem with cash. And I was like, and they were millions of dollars of a company. They're not a tiny company. All of a sudden they had no cash. And the CEOs look at me saying, I don't know why I laugh. Okay, but the CEOs look at me saying, "What happened?" And the poor guy's walking alone. I don't like any CEO to go anything alone. They need to have a comrade. And so I said, "Well, you guys should have seen this." And he's like, "Well, how would we have seen it when we review our P&L, we review our numbers?" So I said, "Well, let me go back and prove that." And so me and the CFO went back and I said, "What's really important here is we have two things and one thing missing. The two things are not properly stated. So your P&L, if he would have looked at that over a period of time. So when you look at your P&L, and it's June, I'm going to look at January through June every month in a line. Okay. So you could see that, gross margin, it was okay. Then you go to the balance sheet. All you do is see the AR going up, not the AR, sorry, the inventory going up. So I was like, okay, well, all right. And then nobody knew how to do a cash flow statement. I go, well, there's a button on your program that we can push and get a cash flow statement. Now, nobody likes the cash flow statement, but CEOs, I will convince every CEO to love the cash flow statement. So I said, and I look at that over time. So I trend everything, guys. I do that all the time. So I could just scan it quickly to see what's the problem, right? So come to find out, then you could see that AR was having a problem. You could see that every month inventory was going up, up, up. Pretty soon you could add the cash and you could say, well, there's $1 million gone down. There's $2 million gone down. Well, they had no controls. People were just purchasing. They had 2 years worth of inventory and nobody saw it. And I'm like, okay, we're just not seeing the right thing. So every industry has its own metrics. And I actually believe our CEOs do a really good job of figuring out what is it that drives the revenue? What are my KPIs? I think they do a good job of that. I think it's this overall review of the financial statements that are sort of lacking. So you should be able to see all those issues very quickly. We could see it within 10 minutes. I'd go, okay, well, what's happening here? And once you teach that for a CEO, they're like, okay, that empowers them to go, okay, AR keeps increasing. Why is that? What's happening? Is that a function of my revenue or is it not? Everybody should look at their AR days. How long does it take to get paid? Trend it on a graph. It should
Yes.
be part of the KPIs,
Yes.
the whole cash cycle. So, and inventory as well. Inventory days, they weren't doing that. So I feel like that's the part that's missing in every part of the equation when we look at founders being successful, scaling, understanding their business, and then selling for a highest multiple.
Yeah. Yeah. Great. So we've kind of covered a number of different bases here, Holly, from insight into what's going on, the story that's being told, an awareness of fraud, how and where to look for that sort of thing, having an effective look through the balance sheet. Is there anything else that I haven't asked about you from this kind of high level conversation, which is appropriate for the audience today before they go and find your book, Finding the Missing Millions in M&A? But is there anything else that would be helpful for you to communicate to my audience of founders and company owners?
Yeah, I think that the only other thing that we touched on, but I'll just kind of land the plane on, is when you're looking at selling for the highest multiple, you want to look at everything beyond financials. We've talked a lot about financials. We talked about the leadership depth. We got to talk about the quality of the revenue, whether there's a concentration. You want to do your best to diversify from that. Private equity, big sophisticated buyers love and pay for recurring revenue, subscription
Yeah.
models,
Yeah.
this kind of stuff. And then never discount technology, your brand, your corporate office, how it looks. All those things actually add to your value. And I think for our owners out there, get people in that can really help you navigate all of that process, including the legal process, because that in and of itself is a crime scene that you need to make sure that you hurdle with business language, earnout language. Make sure your earnouts are very clear and you control them. And when I may say very clear, painstakingly clear, or you'll lose millions there. So get help, because I always think nobody should go it alone. That's what I think. Nobody should
Mm,
go it alone.
yeah,
It's
that's
a
a
high
wonderful.
stakes, emotional, it's complex financial, legal, HR. There's so much going on, and it's usually a big part in your life. You've never done it before, or it just is. It's an important thing to not go it alone. And those people that help you should make you more money. If they're not, trade them in.
Yep, totally. I couldn't agree with you more. I say a similar but different thing in my book. The team that you are likely dealing with on the buy side, especially if they're private equity, but if they have a M&A division of the company that's looking to buy you, then they do this for a living. And so the ill-advised or the maybe arrogant or maybe just a little bit foolish founder owner is the person that thinks that just because they know how to start, grow and run a company, that therefore they should be able to handle this M&A thing with aplomb because it's easy, right? It's not easy. Get experts, bring them into the room, surround yourself with folk
Yeah,
that do this all day, every day, because they will know things that you would just never have even conceived of in the past. And so
that's
bring
right.
more talks in is so, so important. Holly, I have a parting question always for my guests, which is the alternate universe, alternate career question. So there's another Holli Moeini in an imaginary world, and she has a totally different career that wasn't starting life as a CPA and then kind of moving through a whole bunch of companies, helping them navigate the growth and then the M&A piece as well, and then becoming an author and an advisor to founders and owners. She's got a different career that is deeply satisfying to her. What is that career?
Well, prepare yourself for this, because it was a rock star. I really
Yeah,
want
I
to
love it.
just
You're the first
play
one to say that.
guitar. I really wanted to be the next Jimmy Page, and I know that dates myself, but I've been doing this for over 35 years, so I'm dating myself right now. I was like, I took lessons. I thought I'd be really cool and make it. I didn't, and I can't sing, so
There's a bit
here
of a
I
sheer
am.
growth thing going on here too, by the way. So
There you go. Exactly. So one day I'll get my guitar out. I still have it,
you still got it.
and
Okay.
so yeah, no, that a rock star. That's what I really wanted to do.
Amazing. I love that. Nobody's said that to me as yet. So thank you. Holli Moeini, Moeini. People can find you
Perfect.
on LinkedIn, and that'll click through to your website. If they want to get a copy of the book, then that's the way forward. If they want to have a conversation with you in person, they can just click on have a conversation with Holli. Very grateful for you coming on the show today. Thank you so much for your insight and your time. And I look forward to a conversation again in the future.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. I appreciate you and all the work that you're doing in this world too.
Ah, thanks, Holli. What a pleasure. Thanks for listening to the show. If you've enjoyed it, and if you've gotten this far, you definitely have, then I reckon you should go and check out a copy of my book. It's available on my website or Amazon.com. There's an Audible version as well. And it's a blend of personal insight and experience on what it takes to build and sell a company. It's not a how-to guide. You can go to ChatGPT for that. I've had some wonderful unsolicited feedback from people, but I did ask some folk for it, and here is one of the bits of feedback that has come from one of the early readers. Josh has created something rare, a guide that's both deeply practical and genuinely wise. His writing is punchy, clear, and feels like sitting across the table from someone who's been through it all and knows exactly what you need to hear. This is the resource every founder needs when facing the biggest decision of their professional life. Honest, actionable, and completely grounded in reality. That's from Susie McAlpine, who is herself a best-selling author and a speaker and business advisor. Please go check out a copy available on the website. Thanks for listening.